The frost clung to the aspens like old grief, silver and brittle, in the hour before dawn. Caden moved through the timber line on four legs, his wolf form cutting a solitary path through snow that had fallen 3 days prior and refused to melt. 13,000 feet above sea level, the air burned cool enough to crack stone. He'd made this patrol every week for 2 centuries, circling the outer markers of Silver Pine territory before the sun touched the peaks. The routine had become a meditation, though lately it felt more like penance. His joints ached, not the sharp pain of injury, he'd endured plenty of those, but the deeper throb of time accumulating in bone and sinew. 237 years. By wolf standards ancient, by his own reckoning overdue. His grandfather had ruled until 350 before the rebellion tore him apart, but his grandfather had also burned 17 villages and executed children for their parents' defiance. Caden had spent every year since proving he was different. The ache in his shoulders reminded him how much that proof had cost. The scent markers at Eagle's Watch needed refreshing. He lifted his leg against the granite outcropping, layering his signature over the fading traces from last week's round. The act was automatic muscle memory built over decades of claiming this ground. Below the valley spread out in gradients of shadow pine forests, giving way to aspen groves, then the cleared lands around Silver Pine Palace, then the river cutting south toward disputed territory. His territory, his burden, movement in the periphery. Caden's head snapped left ears forward, a doe picking her way through deadfall. She froze when she caught his scent, her eyes wide and black. Prey instinct told her to run. He could cross the distance in 3 bounds, close his jaws around her throat before her muscles even fired. The hunger was there, always there, but he turned away. Unnecessary kills were a luxury he'd never allowed himself. Control was the price of power. His grandfather had forgotten that. Caden never would. The eastern sky bled from black to charcoal. He needed to finish the patrol before dawn broke. Ariana would wake soon, and she'd worry if he wasn't there. 26 years old to his 237, and she still treated him like he might break. The mate bond hummed constant between them, a frequency he had grown so accustomed to that its absence would feel like deafness. Through it now he sensed her sleeping, her breathing deep, and even their infant son's heartbeat small and quick beside her. Silas, 8 weeks old, too young to shift, too young to do anything but sleep and eat and cry. Except something felt wrong. Caden stopped mid-stride. The bond hadn't changed. Ariana was still asleep, still calm, but beneath that familiar thrum ran a current he didn't recognize. Foreign but not quite. Powerful but unfocused, like static before a lightning strike. He'd learned to trust these instincts the way soldiers learn to trust the silence before an ambush. Something had shifted in the night, and every nerve in his body screamed danger. He turned back toward the palace, abandoning the patrol route. The sun would mark the dereliction when it rose and found gaps in his scent trail, but protocol mattered less than the crawling certainty that his family needed him. His paws drove into snow with renewed purpose, eating distance in long strides that pulled at those aging joints. 2 miles of mountain terrain straight downhill, his wolf form dropping elevation with the kind of reckless speed that came from desperation wrapped in experience. The palace emerged from the trees like a fortress carved from the mountain itself. Stone walls 30 feet high, timber reinforcements from trees his great-grandfather had planted. Windows narrow enough to defend courtyards designed for tactical advantage. Home, prison, legacy. He'd inherited it soaked in blood and had spent 2 centuries washing those stains away. Every stone held a memory. Every corridor whispered accusations. He shifted mid-stride, his wolf collapsing into human form between one breath and the next. The transformation used to be seamless. Now it left him gasping, his body taking 3 seconds too long to remember its shape. Naked and steaming in the pre-dawn cold, he grabbed the clothes he'd stashed by the postern gate and dressed quickly. Leather pants, wool shirt, boots, no ceremony. The palace guards at the gate snapped to attention, their eyes carefully averted from their king's undignified scramble into clothing. Inside the stone corridors held yesterday's warmth. Torches burned low in their sconces, casting shadows that danced with his passage. His bare feet made no sound on floors polished by generations of traffic. He passed the great hall where he held court, the war room, where he'd planned campaigns, the library where he'd studied law until the words bled together. 200 years of governance distilled into stone and duty. The royal wing lay quiet, too quiet. Dawn was the hour when palace life began, servants lighting fires, cooks preparing breakfast, guards changing shifts. But now the corridors felt abandoned, as if everyone had collectively decided to sleep late. The wrongness intensified with every step. Their chamber door stood ajar. Caden's hand went to his hip, where a blade should have been, but he'd left his weapons with his clothes outside. Stupid. Careless. The kind of mistake that got the king's killed. He eased the door open, his body coiled for violence, and found something that made violence seem insufficient as a response. Ariana stood in the center of their bedroom, holding Silas against her chest. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, her sleeping gown rumpled from a night's rest. But her eyes were wide and alert, fixed on the floor around her feet, with an expression somewhere between wonder and horror. The morning light filtering through the eastern window painted her in shades of gold and amber, and for a moment she looked like something from an old painting, the queen frozen in time, surrounded by impossible things. 20 white wolf pups carpeted the floor. They lay in a loose circle around Ariana's position, their bodies forming an unmistakable pattern of protection. Some slept, others watched with eyes too aware for creatures who should barely have their vision. The largest sat directly between Ariana and the door, its ears forward, in a posture Caden recognized from his own centuries. The smallest, no bigger than a man's forearm, curled near Ariana's feet, with its nose tucked under its tail. Caden's mind cataloged details with the automatic precision of a warrior assessing a battlefield. White fur on all of them, no variation in color. Young, none older than a month, most barely weeks. Mixed scents, 24 different family signatures. He recognized Beta Garrett's bloodline on 3 of them, the Ironwood Patrol's scent, 2 mountain pack markers on another 4. All silver pine wolves, all from established families, all impossibly present in his locked private chambers. His chest went tight. Caden. Ariana's voice carried no panic, just the flat calm of someone who'd already processed shock and arrived at grim understanding. He shifted. While I was sleeping. He's only 8 weeks old. The words landed like hammer blows. Caden forced himself to move, stepping carefully over the nearest pup, who raised its head to watch but didn't challenge him, and crossed to Ariana's side. She turned slightly, angling Silas so Caden could see their son's face. Human. Pink skin instead of white fur, dark eyes instead of silver. Wolf sight, tiny fists curled against his mother's breast. Completely human. Completely impossible. Caden reached out his hand, trembling in a way he despised, and touched his son's cheek. Warm. Breathing. Healthy. The mate bond pulsed with Ariana's controlled fear, and beneath it he felt something else. A new resonance, foreign and vast, like an echo returning from depths no one had measured. Silas's eyes tracked the movement of Caden's hand with infant focus, and for just a moment, those eyes flickered silver before settling back to the ground. How long? The question came out rougher than intended. I don't know. I woke up maybe 20 minutes ago and found this. Ariana's arms tightened around Silas. The door was still locked from the inside. No windows open, no sign of forced entry. They were just here, all of them, protecting him. 20 pups, 20 families. Caden's mind raced through the implications like a general mapping enemy positions. Every one of these families would be waking now to find their children missing. Everyone would panic, search, demand answers. By noon, the entire pack would know. By evening, neighboring territories would hear rumors. By next week, every alpha from California to Wyoming would be watching Silverpine with predatory interest. He knelt, bringing himself level with the nearest pup. The young wolf, Beta Garrett's son, Finn, he recognized the scent, now met his eyes without flinching. 3 weeks old. Should be stumbling, blind, and deaf, dependent on mother's milk and warmth. Instead, Finn watched Caden with awareness that it suggested weeks of development compressed into days. Intelligence flickered behind those 2 knowing eyes. They were called. Caden spoke the truth aloud, forcing himself to voice what every instinct confronted. Silas shifted for the first time and set out a summons. These pups responded. That's impossible. So is shifting at 8 weeks. Ariana said nothing. The silence stretched, broken only by the soft breathing of 20 sleeping pups and 1 infant who shouldn't exist. Caden stood his knees, protesting the movement, and placed his hand on Ariana's shoulder. Through the bond, he felt her fear crystallizing into something harder. She was Luna of Silverpine, chosen for strength as much as politics. Fear could live alongside duty. She'd learned that the same way he had. We need to return them to their families before panic spreads. Caden moved to the door, his mind already calculating logistics. Then we summon the elders, all three. This is beyond our knowledge. Caden, Ariana's voice stopped him at the threshold. What does this mean? He wanted to lie, wanted to tell her it meant nothing, that Silas was simply precocious, that everything would be fine. But lies had no place between mates, and he'd never insulted Ariana's intelligence by pretending she couldn't see the same shadows he did. It means our son is a true alpha. The words tasted like ash. It means history is repeating, and it means every wolf who remembers my grandfather will be looking at Silas and seeing a monster. The first pup stirred, yawning to reveal needle-sharp teeth. Soon others would wake. Soon parents would arrive. Soon the careful peace Caden had spent 2 centuries building would crack under the weight of prophecy and fear. He left the chamber to summon his beta, the sunrise painting the mountains red as blood. The chaos arrived with the organized precision of a military disaster. Caden had seen enough battles to recognize when containment failed and crisis metastasized beyond control. This was one of those moments, the instant when careful planning met unexpected reality and shattered into fragments of barely managed catastrophe. Beta Garrett reached the royal wing first, his second-in-command's instincts carrying him through the palace corridors before Caden's summons even arrived. 180 years old to Caden's 237, Garrett moved with the efficiency of a soldier who'd learned to waste neither motion nor time. His face, weathered by decades of service, showed no surprise when he found Caden standing guard outside the royal chamber. They'd fought together in the Unification War, back when Silverpine was just one of 12 fractured territories tearing at each other's throats. Blood-forged bonds that transcended rank. How bad? Garrett's voice carried the gravel of too many battle shouts. 20 pups, all under a month, all transported through locked doors during the night. Caden kept his tone level, military report rather than panicked confession. Silas shifted. First time, 8 weeks old. Garrett's jaw tightened. No other reaction, but Caden had known him long enough to read the minute shifts in posture. His beta was running calculations, assessing threat vectors, preparing for whatever came next. That was what made Garrett invaluable, the ability to adapt without wasting time on shock. My son. The question emerged carefully neutral. Finn is inside, unharmed, one of the 20. Something flickered across Garrett's expression. Not quite fear, not quite pride. Something between the two, tangled with the knowledge that his infant son had been marked by forces neither of them fully understood. The bond between Guardian and True Alpha was legendary in the old stories. It was also irrevocable. Orders: secure this wing. No one in or out except family parents. Send runners to each household. Beta discretion, not general announcement. Tell them their pups are safe and to come immediately. Quietly. Caden's mind moved through the protocol-building structure around chaos. Assemble Captain Riker and his best of scouts. I want security review every entrance, every window, or every ventilation shaft. Someone figure out how 20 pups move through solid walls. Garrett nodded once, sharp and absolute, then turned to execute. Caden watched him go and envied the simplicity of following orders rather than giving them. The first parents arrived within minutes, summoned by Garrett's runners, with the kind of urgency that suggested disaster contained rather than disaster averted. Maya, Garrett's mate, came first, a small woman with the kind of tightly controlled strength that came from birthing warriors. She moved past Caden without ceremony and into the royal chamber, emerging seconds later with Finn cradled against her chest. The pup whimpered, once confused by displacement, then settled into his mother's familiar scent. Luna. Maya's voice was respectful but strained. Is he hurt? No. Ariana appeared in the doorway, still holding Silas. None of them are hurt. They're just confused. Maya's eyes flicked to the infant in Ariana's arms, then away. Quick as a knife thrust, Caden saw the fear there, not of Silas himself, but of what Silas represented. An 8-week-old with the power to summon her son through impossible distances. Maya was smart enough to fear that power's implications. Other parents trickled in over the next hour. each responding to Garrett's careful summons with varying degrees of alarm. The Ironwood Patrol's Alpha sent his second since his mate was still nursing. The Mountain Pack families came together, three sets of parents clustering in the corridor with the kind of solidarity that came from shared geography and shared suspicion. Caden greeted each one personally, projecting calm authority while his mind tracked every reaction, every hesitation, every flicker of doubt that crossed their faces. Some were grateful. Their pups had vanished in the night, and Caden had found them. Simple narrative easily accepted. Others were afraid. Their children had been summoned against their will, called to serve a power they couldn't resist. More complicated narrative. Harder to dismiss. A few were calculating. Caden knew those looks well. The ones that assessed political advantage, measured opportunity against risk, wondered how a true alpha child might be leveraged or controlled or eliminated. He marked those faces for later attention. By mid-morning, 19 pups had been returned to 19 families. Only Finn remained since Maya had chosen to stay with Mariana while Garrett managed palace security. The two women sat together in the solar, speaking in low voices while Finn and Silas lay on blankets nearby. Finn had shifted back to human form, a chubby 3-week-old with his father's nose and his mother's serious eyes. Silas remained human as well, though Caden had caught him staring at Finn with unusual focus for an infant who should barely track faces. Caden stood at the window watching the sun climb over the eastern peaks. Silver Pine territory spread below him in shades of green and white forest and snow river and stone. 90,000 acres of mountain wilderness, carefully defended for 2 centuries. 300 wolves called this home, bound by pack law and the fragile trust Caden had built decision by decision, year by year. That trust felt gossamer thin this morning, ready to tear under the weight of prophecy. "My king," Garrett's voice came from the doorway. "Elder Magnus has arrived. He's demanding immediate audience." Caden's chest tightened. Magnus, 400 years old, older than Silver Pine itself. The wolf who'd served Caden's grandfather, who'd watched the tyrants rise and fall, who'd survived the rebellion by switching sides at the perfect moment. Magnus had been Caden's mentor once, teaching him statecraft and strategy. That relationship had soured decades ago, when Magnus began questioning every decision, every policy, every small step away from the old days. They hadn't spoken in 20 years. "Where is he?" "The war room." He refused the formal greeting chamber, said this was tactical, not ceremonial. Of course he did. Magnus never wasted time on protocol when he could make a point through its absence. Caden straightened his shoulders, feeling the weight of kingship settle like armor. "Have Elders Isla and Marcus summoned as well. If Magnus wants a council, we'll give him one with full oversight." He turned to Ariana, who'd been listening from her seat by the fire. Their eyes met, and through the bond, he felt her steady resolve. She nodded once. Permission, trust, partnership. The reasons he'd chosen her as mate in Luna. The war room occupied the palace's central tower, its position chosen for defensive advantage and symbolic weight. Stone walls, 3 feet thick, arrow slits overlooking all approaches, a single entrance, easily defended. The circular chamber had witnessed 2 centuries of strategic planning, battles mapped, treaties, negotiated, executions ordered. A massive oak table dominated the center, its surface scarred by knives and marked by countless meetings. Maps covered the walls, showing Silver Pine territory in relation to neighboring packs and disputed lands. Elder Magnus stood with his back to the door, studying the eastern map with the focus of a general plan invasion. 4 centuries showed in the silver of his fur. He stood in wolf, too ancient to bother with human courtesy, and the slight hitch in his rear left leg from an old wound that never quite healed. He was massive, even by Alpha standards, his shoulders broader than any wolf Caden had ever known. Power radiated from him like heat from forged iron. You felt it. Magnus didn't turn, his voice rumbling with the depth of centuries. "Don't pretend you didn't." Caden closed the door behind him. "I felt something at dawn, before I found the pups. A pulse, Alpha command, strong enough to cross my territory and wake me from sleep." Magnus finally turned his silver eyes, fixing on Caden with the weight of accumulated judgment. "Your son, 8 weeks old, sending out summons like a war horn. Do you understand what that means?" "It means he's powerful. It means he's dangerous." Magnus moved closer, his limp barely slowing him. "Your grandfather sent out a pulse like that once. summoned every wolf in 3 territories to his side. That was the day he stopped being a leader and became a tyrant. Power like that doesn't ask permission, it takes. It consumes, it corrupts. Silas is 8 weeks old. He's not corrupted. He's barely conscious. Neither was your grandfather at 8 weeks. Magnus's lips pulled back from the yellow fangs. But the seed was there. The capacity for domination wrapped in innocent flesh. I watched it grow. I watched it metastasize. I won't watch it again. The threat hung in the air between them, unspoken, but understood. Caden held his ground, meeting Magnus's stare with the kind of stillness that came from facing down larger predators. You're suggesting what exactly? I'm stating fact. True alphas are born once every 5 generations, and they either unite the packs or destroy them. Your grandfather chose destruction. You've spent 2 centuries proving you're different. But your son, Magnus, moved to the table, his claws clicking against stone. Your son is the proof, Simons. He's an infant. He's a weapon, and weapons must be controlled or eliminated. The words landed like punches. Caden's hands clenched at his sides, his nails biting into palms. 30 years of alpha training kept his voice level. You dare suggest I eliminate my son? I dare state what you're too afraid to admit. Magnus's eyes never wavered. There's a reason true alphas are rare, Caden. Most are killed in infancy. Preventative mercy. It's brutal, but it's survival. It's murder. It's kingship. The hard choices no one else wants to make. Magnus settled his haunches, wolf form lending gravitas to pronouncement. But I'm not here to debate morality. I'm here to present options because the choice is coming, whether you're ready or not. Footsteps in the corridor announced the arrival of Elders Isla and Marcus. Caden welcomed the interruption, using the moment to gather himself. Magnus's words had opened wounds Caden thought long scarred over the fear that biology was destiny, that his grandfather's blood ran too strong to deny that loving his son meant dooming his pack. Elder Isla entered first, her 50 years making her the youngest of Silverpine's 3 elders, but no less formidable. She specialized in wolf magic, the old arts that predated pack law and territory. Where Magnus represented tradition and Marcus represented force, Isla represented the mystical connection between wolf nature and lunar cycles. She wore her human form with quiet dignity, gray streaking through black hair, her eyes the pale blue of high-altitude ice. Elder Marcus followed his massive frame, filling the doorway even in human form. Past warrior, current keeper of pack law. 250 years of combat experience showed in the scars crossing his bare chest and the way he moved, economically balanced, ready. He and Caden had fought together in the Unification War, though Marcus had been a captain then, and Caden barely passed his first century. Mutual respect existed there, built on shared violence and shared purpose. You summoned us, Alphaking. Marcus's voice carried parade ground precision. Elder Magnus summoned himself. I'm requesting full counsel because what we discuss affects the entire pack. Caden moved to the table's head, claiming the position through presence rather than ceremony. My son shifted last night, 8 weeks old. He summoned 20 pups to his location through means we don't understand. Magnus believes this confirms true alpha manifestation. I want to know what that means for Silverpine. Isla and Marcus exchanged glances. Not surprised they'd both felt the pulse. But confirmation settled differently than rumor. The old prophecies mentioned true alphas. Isla spoke carefully, measuring each word. They appear in times of great upheaval. Some unite fractured packs. Others bring ruin. The power itself is neutral. Intent shapes outcome. And an 8-week-old has no intent. Marcus crossed his arms, his tactical mind visible in the way he studied the room. Just instinct and raw power. That makes him more dangerous, not less. The prophecy is specific. Magnus produced a scroll from somewhere in his fur, a trick of old magic that made Caden's teeth ache. He dropped it on the table with deliberate weight. I brought this from my personal archives. Pre-unification text, 400 years old at minimum. Read it, then tell me your son isn't the wolf it describes. Caden unrolled the parchment, noting the careful preservation and the scent of cedar oil used to maintain the vellum. The writing was old pack dialect, formal and archaic, but readable. His eyes moved across the text, translating mentally. When the moon's heir wakes before his season, The packs shall kneel, or kingdoms fall to ash. His power to unite or to annihilate. The father must choose at the blood moon's rise, bind the child's wolf and live in chains, or free his power and watch the world burn. No path leads home unchanged. The words seemed to pulse with their own weight. Caden read them twice, then a third time, searching for ambiguity and finding none. The prophecy was clear. The choice was impossible. Blood moon. Marcus moved to the eastern window, calculating something. Next one visible from Silver Pine is 4 weeks out, 28 days. 4 weeks to decide whether to cripple my son or risk everyone I know. Caden's voice came out flat. That's not a choice. That's cruelty. That's kingship. Magnus repeated his earlier assessment. Your father faced a similar choice with your grandfather. He chose family over duty. The resulting war killed 4,000 wolves across all territories. Your father among them. The history lesson landed with practiced precision. Caden's father had died defending the tyrant, too loyal to see the monster his parent had become. The rebellion had torn through Silver Pine like wildfire, and young Caden had inherited a kingdom built on ashes and grudges. 37 years old, barely past his first century, suddenly responsible for 300 wolves who hated his bloodline. What does binding mean? Caden forced himself to ask the practical question. Isla answered, her voice gentle but firm. Magical suppression of the wolf nature. It can be done at the blood moon when lunar power is strongest. The ritual would lock Silas's wolf deep inside him, beyond reach. He'd live as human, fully human. No shifting, no pack bond, no wolf instincts. Essentially neutered of everything that makes him our kind. He'd be alive, Magnus interjected. That's more than most true alphas get. He'd be broken. Ariana's voice came from the doorway. No one had heard her approach, but she stood there with Silas in her arms, her eyes blazing with protective fury. You're discussing crippling my son like it's a tactical problem. It is a tactical problem. Magnus didn't flinch from her anger. Your maternal instinct says protect the child. My experience says protect the pack. Sometimes those imperatives conflict. Then we find a third option. Ariana moved to stand beside Caden, presenting unified front. We train him, teach him control, show him what his power can do for good rather than assuming he'll use it for evil. Your optimism is noted, Luna. Magnus's tone suggested he found optimism naive. But power of this magnitude doesn't respond to training. It demands outlet. And the only outlets are domination or destruction. That's not true. Isla stepped forward, her voice cutting through the rising tension. True alphas can be guided. It's difficult, extraordinarily difficult, but possible. The key is starting early, teaching control before the power fully manifests. He's 8 weeks old. Caden gestured helplessly. How do you teach control to an infant? Very carefully. Isla's expression was serious, but not without hope. And with help, I can work with him, channel his power through lunar meditation. It won't be traditional training, but Silas is already beyond traditional parameters. Magnus snorted. Meditation? You want to teach meditation to a baby? I want to try. Isla met the ancient wolf's stare without backing down. Because the alternative is murdering an innocent child or condemning him to half-life. Neither is acceptable to me. Acceptable is irrelevant. Survival is paramount. Magnus turned to Caden. You have 4 weeks, Alphaking. 4 weeks to prepare for the blood moon and the choice it demands. I suggest you use that time to consider what matters more, your son's life or your people's safety. Because you can't guarantee both. He shifted mid-stride, his massive wolf form compacting down into something smaller and more mobile, then padded from the war room without waiting for dismissal. The door swung closed behind him with hollow finality. Silence filled the space Magnus left. Caden stared at the prophecy scroll, its words mocking him with false simplicity. Bind or free, chain or burn. 4 weeks to choose between atrocities. We'll find another way. Ariana's hand found his, her fingers threading through his with a kind of certainty that came from mating bonds and shared purpose. We have to. Do we? The question escaped before Caden could stop it. Magnus is right about one thing. I'm Alphaking. My duty is to the pack first, family second. If Silas is genuinely a threat, he's 8 weeks old. Ariana's grip tightened. He giggles when I nurse him. He cries when he's cold. He's our son, Caden, not a threat assessment. He summoned 20 pups through solid walls. So we teach him not to do it again. Caden wanted to believe her, wanted to think that love and training could overcome biology and prophecy. But Magnus's words echoed with the weight of experience. Power like that doesn't ask permission. It takes, it consumes, it corrupts. Elder Marcus cleared his throat, drawing their attention. Permission to speak freely, my king. Always. You're both right. Silas is your son, and he's also an unprecedented threat. But debating which identity takes priority is wasting time. Marcus moved to the table, his scarred hands spreading across the map of Silver Pine territory. 4 weeks isn't much, but it's enough to prepare. If we're going to try training him, we start immediately. If that fails, you'll have enough data to make an informed choice in the market. And if other packs hear about this, which they will, you'll need defensive positions established before they come to investigate. The tactical assessment cut through emotional paralysis. Caden felt his mind shift into strategic mode, the part of him that had won campaigns and held territory. Marcus was right. Time spent arguing was time lost to preparation. Isla, you begin meditation training with Silas today. Document everything: progress, setbacks, any indication of control or lack thereof. Caden's voice steadied as he issued orders. Marcus, I want full security review. Every entrance gets double guards. Establish patrol routes that overlap. Anyone approaching Silver Pine territory gets monitored and logged. And the other packs? Marcus asked. Word will spread. By tonight, every alpha within 200 miles will know a true alpha manifested in your line. Then we control the narrative before rumors do the work for us. Caden turned to Ariana. We send formal announcements to all major territories. No deception, no minimizing. We tell them Silas is true alpha, that we're training him, and that we welcome oversight from any alpha who wants to witness his development. Ariana's eyes widened. You're inviting them to judge our son? I'm inviting them to see that we have nothing to hide. Transparency builds trust. Secrecy breeds paranoia. Caden had learned that lesson the hard way, watching his grandfather's isolation fuel the rebellion. If they want to fear Silas, they'll fear him regardless. But if we show them we're taking this seriously, treating it as pack concern rather than private matter, maybe they'll give us time to prove he's not his great-grandfather reborn. And if they don't give us time, Ariana's voice was quiet but sharp, if they decide prevention is safer than patience, then we defend our son with everything we have. Caden met her eyes, letting her see the absolute certainty there. I won't let them kill him, but I also won't let him become the monster Magnus fears. 4 weeks. We have 4 weeks to find the path between those extremes. The afternoon brought a visitor Caden didn't expect and absolutely didn't want. The scout reported Alpha Thorn at the border requesting formal parley under traditional truce terms. Caden's first instinct was refusal. Thorn was ambitious, cunning, and 45 years old with something to prove. But pack law was clear. Parley requests under truce banner couldn't be denied without cause. Refusal meant declaration of hostility, and Silver Pine couldn't afford new enemies while managing internal crisis. How many in his party? Caden stood in the stable yard watching his patrol return from border duty. 12. The scout, young wolf named Derek, barely past his first decade, dismounted with practiced ease. Standard honor guard, no obvious weapons beyond ceremonial blades. He claims urgent business requests audience before sundown. 12 wolves, not enough for invasion, too many for casual diplomacy. Thorn was making statement without committing to threat. Caden ran calculations measuring risk against protocol. Refusing parley would signal weakness or fear. Accepting it gave Thorn insight into Silver Pine's current state. Neither option was good. Both were necessary. Summon Beta Garrett and Captain Riker. We'll receive Alpha Thorn in the formal greeting chamber with full court presence. Caden gestured to the stable master. Prepare guest quarters for 13 wolves, standard diplomatic accommodations, and double the guard detail around the royal wing. Derek nodded and sprinted toward the barracks. Caden watched him go, remembering when he'd been that young, that certain in his movements. Age was making him philosophical. He despised it. Alpha Thorn arrived precisely at sundown, timing his entrance for maximum dramatic effect. The formal greeting chamber occupied the palace's western wing, positioned to catch final daylight through floor-to-ceiling windows. Caden sat in the Alpha's chair. Not quite a throne, but close with Beta Garrett standing to his right and Captain Riker to his left. Ariana occupied the Luna seat beside him, her presence both political statement and personal support. 20 of Silverpine's most experienced warriors lined the walls, their postures ceremonial, but their readiness evident. The doors opened, and Thorn entered with the controlled confidence of someone who'd never lost a fight. 45 years old to Caden's 237, but Thorn moved with the vigor of youth. Muscular build, dark hair pulled back in warrior's tail, eyes the color of burnt amber. His honor guard followed in tight formation, 11 wolves who moved like soldiers rather than courtiers. Thorn approached the proper distance, then executed a bow calibrated for respect between equals, rather than deference to superior. Political calculation in every gesture. Alpha King Caden, Luna Ariana. Thorn's voice carried the rough edges of someone who'd spent more time shouting orders than making speeches. Thank you for receiving me under truce banner. Alpha Thorn. Caden kept his tone neutral. Your request mentioned urgent business. I assume this concerns the rumors already spreading from my territory. Rumors. Thorn's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Is that what we're calling them? Because I felt the pulse this morning. Every wolf in my territory felt it. Alpha Command strong enough to cross 50 miles and wake us from sleep. That's not rumor. That's power manifestation. Direct, Caden appreciated that even as he calculated how to respond. Denying the obvious would insult Thorn's intelligence. Confirming it gave information the Silverpine couldn't control. My son shifted for the first time last night. Caden chose truth over evasion. 8 weeks old, the pulse you felt was his wolf nature awakening. Unexpected but not unprecedented. Unprecedented is exactly what it is. Thorn moved closer, his honor guard maintaining formation. I've lived 45 years Alpha King. My father lived 83, his father 120. Not one of us has ever heard of a pup shifting before 6 months, and certainly not with enough power to send command pulses across territories. Your point? My point is that I know what a true alpha feels like. Thorn stopped at the respectful distance, his eyes locked on Caden's. My father felt it once, from your grandfather. Right before your grandfather burned 3 villages and executed my uncle for refusing to submit. So forgive me if the sensation of alpha command waking me at dawn brings back uncomfortable memories. The accusation hung in the air unspoken but understood. Thorn wasn't here for diplomatic pleasantries. He was here to assess whether history was repeating itself and whether preventative action was required. Caden stood slowly, using his height advantage and the symbolism of the Alpha's chair. I am not my grandfather. I've spent 2 centuries proving that. Silverpine has been at peace for 50 years. No territorial expansion, no forced submissions, no executions for political dissent. Everything my grandfather did, I have undone. True, Thorn acknowledged with a slight nod. You've been a good king, fair, measured, but you're not the question. Your son is. My son is 8 weeks old. Your son has power that eclipses anything I've encountered in 4 decades. Power doesn't age. It doesn't learn mercy. It simply is. Thorn's voice remained level, but his intensity increased. I'm not here to threaten you, Alpha King. I'm here to understand what you plan to do about it. Train him. Caden gestured to Elder Isola, who stood near the window. Elder Isla specializes in lunar magic and power channeling. She'll work with Silas to develop control and restraint. You're going to teach restraint to an infant. Thorn's skepticism was audible. I'm going to try because the alternative is murdering my son or binding his wolf permanently. Neither is acceptable. To you, Thorn's gaze swept the room, taking in the assembled Silverpine wolves. But what about the other packs? What about those of us who remember what your grandfather did? Do we get a voice in whether your son lives long enough to repeat those atrocities? You get the same voice every alpha has under pack law, the right to challenge if threat it is proven. Caden kept his tone steady despite the fury building in his chest. But Silas is not a threat. He's a child. Judge him by his actions, not his bloodline. His actions. Thorn nodded slowly. Fine, I'll give you that courtesy. But know this, Alpha King, I'm not the only one who felt that pulse. Every territory from here to California is watching Silver Pine now. Some will give you time, others won't. And if your son loses control, if he sends out another command like this morning's, those of us with long memories will come to finish what your grandfather started. The threat was clear, also legal. Pack law permitted intervention against rogue alphas if they demonstrated clear danger to their territories. Thorn was establishing grounds for future action while maintaining present peace. Noted, Caden descended from the alpha's chair, moving to stand at equal height with Thorn. And understand this, I will defend my son against anyone who moves against him without cause. Anyone. I don't care if it's you or a coalition of every territory west of the Rockies. Silas is my heir and my pack. That makes him worth war. Thorn studied him for a long moment, weighing commitment against threat. Finally, he nodded once. Then I hope your training works, Alphaking, for all our sakes. He turned and departed with his honor guard. The formal parley concluded. Caden watched them go, feeling the weight of Thorn's warning settle like snow on distant peaks. War was coming. Maybe not today, maybe not next week. But it was gathering on the horizon, waiting for the first misstep to justify its arrival. That went well. Garrett's dry assessment drew a harsh laugh from Caden. He threatened my son and promised to return with an army. But he left peacefully. Under the circumstances, I'm calling that a win. Garrett moved to stand beside his alpha, their shoulders nearly touching. Though he's right about one thing, every territory will be watching. First sign of trouble, they'll mobilize. Then we make sure there's no trouble. Caden turned to Elder Isla. How soon can you begin with Silas? Tonight if necessary, though I should warn you I've never attempted this with anyone younger than 6 months. The theory is sound, but application. She trailed off, her expression troubled. Will it hurt him? No, it's meditation-based, not invasive. But whether an 8-week-old can focus long enough to benefit, I honestly don't know. Caden nodded. 4 weeks, 28 days, 720 hours. Every moment spent hoping his son could learn in weeks what most wolves took years to master. Night fell over Silver Pine with the particular darkness of mountain winters. Caden stood on the eastern battlement, watching stars emerge in configurations his grandfather had probably seen. His father had definitely studied, and he himself had memorized over 2 centuries of lonely vigils. The cold cut through wool and leather, promising snow by morning. Below the palace settled into evening routines. Lights flickered in windows as families gathered for dinner. Guards changed shifts with practiced precision. Somewhere in the royal wing, Ariana was nursing Silas while Elder Isla prepared for their first training session. Everything looked normal. Everything felt balanced on knife's edge. A presence behind him, Captain Riker moving with the careful silence of a professional soldier. My king, perimeter reports are clean, no unusual movement. Thorn's party left Silver Pine territory an hour ago, heading southeast toward his own lands. Good. And Caden didn't turn from his contemplation of the stars. How long have you served Silver Pine, Riker? 63 years, my king. Joined in the Guard the year after the Unification War ended. Then you remember what it was like. The distrust, the fear. Every decision scrutinized, every action interpreted through the lens of my grandfather's atrocities. I remember. Riker moved to stand at the battlement, his scarred hands resting on stone worn smooth by generations of guards. I also remember you earning trust, one decision at a time. 63 years of good governance. That has to count for something. Does it? Caden gestured toward the darkness beyond Silver Pine borders. Thorn felt one pulse and immediately assumed the worst. How many others are doing the same calculation? How many are already planning intervention? Probably all of them. Riker's honesty was refreshing in its bleakness. But that's not new, my king. We've always been the pack. Everyone watches, waiting for us to slip. Your grandfather's legacy casts a long shadow. You've just lived long enough to forget how dark it is. I've never forgotten. Caden's voice came out sharper than intended. Every time I issue an order, every time I settle a dispute, every time I defend our borders, I'm thinking about him. Wondering if this is the moment I cross the line from king to tyrant. If I make the choice that proves I'm his grandson after all. And you never have. Riker's tone was matter of fact. 63 years, my king. I've served under you longer than most wolves live. If you were going to become your grandfather, it would have happened by now. Unless the trigger isn't time, unless it's bloodline, Caden finally turned to face his captain. What if Magnus is right? What if true alphas don't choose to become tyrants? They're built that way from birth, and it's just a matter of time before the power corrupts them. Then we're already doomed, and there's no point worrying about it. Riker's blunt assessment carried the ring of soldier's philosophy. But I don't believe that. I've seen too many wolves make too many choices to think anyone is doomed from birth. Your son has power. What he does with it, that's choice. That's the part where we have influence. Movement at the tower entrance announced another arrival, Beta Garrett, carrying a dispatch case. His expression suggested the news wasn't good. Report came in from our scouts at the northern border. Garrett handed over a sealed letter. Alpha Soren of the Nightfall Pack requests formal audience, arriving in 3 days with an honor guard of 50. Caden broke the seal, scanning the formal language. Soren was 300 years old, nearly as ancient as Magnus, and commanded one of the largest territories in the Northern Rockies. 50 wolves suggested serious intention. The letter cited mutual concerns regarding recent power manifestations and the need for inter-pack cooperation in uncertain times. Translation. Soren felt the pulse and wanted to assess the threat personally. 50 wolves. Caden refolded the letter. That's closer to invasion than diplomacy. It's also legal under current treaties. Garrett's tactical mind was visible in his calculations. We can't refuse without declaring hostility. And if Soren brings 50 others, we'll match or exceed. We could have 200 visiting alphas within the week. All wanting to see Silas, judge him, measure the threat. Caden crushed the letter in his fist. My son becomes a spectacle. Or an opportunity, Riker interjected. You said it yourself, transparency builds trust. Let them come. Let them see an 8-week-old who giggles and sleeps and learn. Hard to call that a threat. Unless he sends out another pulse while they're here. Garrett voiced the fear they were all thinking. Then he becomes proof of danger, and we have 200 hostile wolves inside our territory. The scenarios multiplied in Caden's mind, each worse than the last. Refuse the audiences and appear guilty. Accept them and risk confrontation. Try to control information and fuel a paranoia. Share everything and invite intervention. Every choice led toward conflict. We accept Soren's request. Caden forced his voice into command mode. And we prepare for others. Garrett, I want full defensive positions established. Riker, your guards get doubled shifts. Every visiting alpha gets monitored. We're polite, we're transparent, but we're also ready for hostility disguised as diplomacy. Both officers nodded, moving to execute orders. Caden remained on the battlement, watching the stars and thinking about prophecies. 4 weeks until Blood Moon. 4 weeks to prove his son could control power that had destroyed previous true alphas. 4 weeks while every pack in the Rockies watched and waited for justification to attack. The weight of the crown had never felt heavier. The royal wing was quiet when Caden finally returned, his body exhausted from hours of standing watch and his mind still racing through tactical scenarios. Ariana was in the nursery, their private chamber converted into both bedroom and infant care space. Silas slept in his bassinet, one tiny fist curled near his face, completely oblivious to the political storms gathering around him. Elder Isla sat in the chair beside the window, making notes in a leather journal by candlelight. How did it go? Caden kept his voice low, conscious of the sleeping infant. Isla looked up, her expression thoughtful. Inconclusive. I attempted basic breathing meditation, guiding him to feel his own energy, teaching him to hold it inside rather than releasing it unconsciously. He watched me the whole time with unusual focus for an 8-week-old. But whether he understood or was simply staring at a new face, I can't determine. Did he pulse again? No, that's positive. Whatever triggered this morning's summons hasn't repeated. Isla set down her journal. Though I should note the 20 pups he called, I examined 3 of them this afternoon with their parents' permission. They all show accelerated development. Speech patterns, more advanced motor control, better than expected for their ages. The bond Silas formed with them is affecting their growth. Caden felt his chest tighten. Is that dangerous? Unknown. It could be beneficial, faster learning, better instincts, or it could be psychological damage from forced bonding. We'll need to monitor them long term. Isla stood gathering her materials. I'll return tomorrow for another session, and every day after. 4 weeks isn't much time, but it's what we have. After she left, Caden moved to the bassinet. Silas continued sleeping, his breathing deep and even. Caden reached out his scarred finger, tracing the curve of his son's cheek. Soft skin warm with life, completely trusting. This was the monster Magnus feared. This tiny creature who couldn't even hold his own head up. He cried twice during meditation. Ariana's voice came from the doorway. She'd been standing there watching her expression unreadable. Not distress, frustration. Like he knew what Isla wanted but couldn't figure out how to do it. That might be good. Caden straightened his back, protesting the movement. Frustration implies understanding. Understanding implies capacity to learn. Or we're projecting adult thoughts onto infant reactions. Ariana moved to stand beside him, her hand finding his. He's 8 weeks old, Caden. Maybe he was just tired and hungry and confused about why the strange woman wouldn't let him sleep. Maybe. But Caden didn't believe it. His son had shifted at 8 weeks, summoned 20 pups through impossible distances, and now showed unusual focus during magical training. Those weren't normal infant behaviors. Silas was extraordinary. The question was whether extraordinary meant chosen or cursed. A knock at the door interrupted the moment, soft but urgent. Garrett's voice came through. "My king, something you need to see." Caden opened the door to find his beta holding another sealed letter, this one marked with the crest of the High Council. The High Council was supposed to be ceremonial, a coalition of eldest alphas who advised on interpack disputes. In practice, they were politically powerful enough to influence smaller territories and sway neutral packs. A letter from them meant official attention on a scale Caden couldn't dismiss. He broke the seal and read quickly. The language was formal, respectful, and absolutely terrifying in its implications. The High Council formally acknowledged Silas's manifestation as true alpha. They commended Caden's commitment to training and oversight. They also mandated external supervision council observers would be stationed at Silverpine until Silas reached maturity or demonstrated conclusive control. Refusal would be interpreted as hostility toward lawful governance and could result in sanction, including military intervention. Translation: they were placing Caden's pack under scrutiny with legal authority to intervene if they decided Silas was dangerous. They're sending observers, Caden's voice was flat, to monitor Silas, report on his progress, judge whether he's threat enough to justify intervention. Garrett's jaw tightened. That's not oversight, that's occupation. It's legal occupation. They're invoking the Unification Treaty's Mutual Security Clause. Caden scanned the letter again, searching for loopholes and finding none. Any true alpha manifestation gives the council authority to monitor until maturity or conclusive control. It's meant to prevent another war like the one my grandfather started. When do they arrive? 5 days before Soren, before any other individual alphas. The council takes priority. Caden crumpled the letter. We're going to have strangers living in our palace, watching our son, documenting every moment. And if they decide he's too dangerous, they have the authority to call for binding or execution with full legal backing. The word execution hung in the air like poison. Ariana moved closer to the bassinet, her body language unconsciously protective. Through the mate bond, Caden felt her fear crystallizing into fury. They can't. Her voice shook with restrained emotion. Pack law protects infants. Even true alphas can't be executed before their first year, unless they present clear and immediate danger to multiple territories. Caden quoted the exception clause. And a pulse strong enough to wake wolves 50 miles away could be interpreted as immediate danger. Could be, not is. Ariana's eyes blazed. They'd have to prove threat, not just potential. Proving threat is subjective when you control the definition. Garrett's military background showed in his assessment. Council observers will be looking for any excuse. One more pulse, one loss of control, one moment where Silas shows power without restraint. They'll call it evidence and move for intervention. Caden wanted to argue, wanted to believe pack law would protect his son, but he'd seen too much politics to trust in legal protections when power and fear were in play. The council wasn't coming to help. They were coming to prepare justification for whatever action they'd already decided was necessary. We give them nothing. Caden's voice hardened into command. Silas stays in the royal wing. Only family and Elder Isla have access. The observers get daily reports but no direct interaction. We're cooperative, but we protect our son's privacy. They won't accept that, Garrett warned. They'll push for full access. Then they'll be disappointed. I'm Alphaking of Silverpine. They have authority to observe our pack, not dictate how we raise our children. Caden moved to the window, staring out at the darkness. If they want war over access protocols, we'll give them war. But they don't get my son. Silence followed the declaration. Caden knew it was probably futile. The council had political power that could isolate Silverpine, turn other packs against them, create siege conditions without ever firing an arrow. But some lines couldn't be crossed. Some compromises destroyed what they were meant to protect. There's one more thing. Garrett's reluctance was audible. The letter mentions you specifically. It says the council has questions about your suitability to raise a true alpha given your grandfather's history. They want to interview you, separately, without Luna Ariana present. The accusation was clear enough. They didn't trust Caden either. They thought his bloodline made him complicit, that he'd protect his son, even if it meant repeating his grandfather's atrocities. 2 centuries of good governance meant nothing against genetic suspicion. When Caden asked through clenched teeth, they didn't specify, just that it's mandatory before they'll finalize any oversight arrangements. Of course, Caden felt the trap closing. Refuse the interview and appear guilty. Submit to it and give them ammunition for whatever narrative they want to construct. Notify them or comply with any lawful requests, but schedule it after their arrival. I want time to understand what they're actually asking. Garrett nodded and departed, leaving Caden alone with Ariana and their sleeping son. The weight of political maneuvering pressed down like physical force. Every decision felt like choosing which disaster to embrace, which compromise would hurt least, which line could be held against inevitable collapse. This isn't sustainable. Ariana's voice was quiet but certain. We can't fight every pack in the Rockies. We can't defend against the council and visiting alphas, and whoever else decides Silas is too dangerous. Even if we wanted to, we don't have the strength. I know. Caden moved to sit in the chair. Isla had vacated his body, finally acknowledging exhaustion. But I don't know what else to do. Surrender him, let them take him, bind his wolf, and condemn him to half-life. No, but maybe we accept that this isn't a battle we can win alone. Ariana knelt beside his chair, her hand on his knee. You've spent 2 centuries proving you're different from your grandfather. Building alliances, earning trust, creating stability. Call in those debts. Remind every pack that gave you the chance to lead that you're asking the same for Silas. And if they refuse, then we learn who our real allies are. Her expression was fierce despite the fear underneath. But we ask, we don't just prepare for war, we work for peace. That's what makes you different from your grandfather. He demanded. You request, he conquered. You cooperate. Show them that difference through how you handle this. The logic was sound. The emotion was appealing. But Caden had lived long enough to know that cooperation required partners willing to cooperate. If the council had already decided Silas was too dangerous, no amount of diplomacy would change their conclusion. Still, Ariana was right that isolation guaranteed failure. His grandfather had ruled through domination and died surrounded by enemies. Caden had ruled through coalition and survived 2 centuries. Maybe that approach could extend to protecting his son. I'll send letters tomorrow. Caden pulled her closer, needing the physical contact. To every alpha I've worked with, every territory I've allied with. Explain the situation honestly. Ask for their patience requests. They withhold judgment until Silas is old enough to prove himself. That's all we can do. Ariana rested her head against his shoulder. In hope it's enough. They sat together in the quiet nursery, watching their son sleep while outside the window. The stars wheeled through configurations that had witnessed empires rise and fall. Somewhere beyond Silverpine borders, armies were preparing. Councils were deliberating. Alphas were calculating. All of them focused on the tiny infant sleeping in his bassinet, unaware that his existence had shattered the fragile peace his father had spent 2 centuries building. Caden closed his eyes and tried to remember what hope felt like. I'll carefully parse the instruction, considering potential nuances in the language. The precise wording suggests a deliberate choice of 5,000 words, which might indicate a specific narrative constraint or pacing requirement for this section of the story. The total word count from the outline sections adds up to 600 words, which exceeds the specified 5,000 word limit. I'll need to strategically condense sections while maintaining narrative depth and emotional impact. Key events like Garrett's death, the siege's first assault, and the Blood Moon's onset require careful narrative treatment. I'll prioritize critical plot progression and emotional resonance, potentially trimming descriptive passages to fit the word constraint. The outline's complexity demands a precise, economical storytelling approach. Each scene must serve multiple narrative purposes, advancing plot, revealing character motivations, and maintaining dramatic tension within the tight word limit. I'll focus on Caden's strategic perspective, ensuring the male 60-plus viewpoint drives the tactical narrative while preserving cinematic prose quality. The U.S. military setting provides a structured framework for exploring war's human cost through Garrett's death and Nadia's crisis. Embedded dialogue and paragraph-level story advancement will be crucial to maintaining narrative momentum without unnecessary exposition. The goal is a tightly constructed segment that builds toward the Blood Moon climax. 3 days proved insufficient to prepare for the gathering storm. The High Council observers arrived at dawn on the third day, 6 ancient wolves whose combined age exceeded a millennium. They moved through Silver Pine Palace with the entitled precision of those accustomed to deference, claiming the East Wing and immediately establishing what they called oversight protocols. In practice, this meant demanding hourly reports on Silas's condition, mandatory attendance at all training sessions, and written justifications for every decision regarding the infant's care. Caden endured their presence the way he'd endured winter campaigns, grim necessity wrapped in tactical patience. The head observer, Elder Cassius, was 450 years old and carried himself with the particular arrogance of wolves who'd outlived their enemies through political maneuvering rather than combat prowess. His silver fur showed no scars. His eyes held the calculating coldness of someone who'd sent others to die while he remained safe behind council chambers. The first training session with observers present became a spectacle that made Caden's teeth ache. Elder Isela attempted her meditation work with Silas while 6 ancient wolves watched from the periphery, making notes in leather journals and exchanging meaningful glances. The infant lasted 10 minutes before crying from overstimulation, and Cassius recorded it as evidence of insufficient control and dangerous emotional volatility. He's 10 weeks old. Caden's voice carried the barely restrained fury of a father watching his child be treated like a specimen. Crying is normal. Normal infants don't summon 20 pups through solid walls. Cassius didn't look up from his notes. We're not here to assess normal development, Alphaking. We're here to measure threat potential. Ariana had physically restrained Caden from responding. The mate bond burned with shared rage, but attacking a council observer would give them exactly the justification they needed. So Caden swallowed his fury and watched strangers judge his son, documenting every moment as evidence for whatever conclusion they'd already reached. The 5th day brought Alpha Soren with his 50 wolves. 300 years old, massive even in human form. Soren commanded the Nightfall Pack with the kind of brutal efficiency that came from surviving multiple wars. He'd fought alongside Caden's grandfather during the expansion campaigns, then switched sides during the rebellion when the tide turned. Political opportunism disguised as pragmatic survival. Caden had never trusted him, but had maintained cordial relations because Nightfall territory bordered Silver Pine to the north. Enemies on your border were luxuries no king could afford. Soren's 50 warriors established camp outside palace walls, a temporary settlement that looked disturbingly permanent. Military precision in every tent placement, defensive positions disguised as courtesy. Caden recognized siege preparation when he saw it. The formal audience happened in the Great Hall with Soren's honor guard lining one wall and Silver Pine's warriors lining the other. 200 wolves in confined space, all armed, all watching for the first sign of hostility. The air tasted like violence waiting for permission. Alphaking Caden, Soren's voice rumbled like distant thunder. I appreciate your hospitality in these uncertain times. Alpha Soren, your presence honors Silver Pine. The lie tasted like copper. Though 50 warriors seems excessive for a diplomatic visit, these are dangerous times. A true alpha has manifested for the first time in 2 centuries. Forgive me for bringing adequate protection. Soren's smile showed too many teeth. I'm sure you understand the need for caution when power of this magnitude awakens. My son is 11 weeks old. The only magnitude he demonstrates is lung capacity when he's hungry. Your son sent out an alpha command that woke wolves in 3 territories. That's not normal infant behavior, Alpha King. That's a weapon learning to fire. The accusation was blunt enough to draw reactions from both sides. Silver Pine warriors shifted into ready positions. Soren's guard responded in kind. 200 wolves on the edge of violence, separated by protocol in Caden's control. My son is being trained by Elder Isla in control and restraint. The High Council has observers documenting his progress. Every measure is being taken to ensure his power develops safely. Caden kept his voice level despite the rage building in his chest. What more do you want, Alpha Soren? I want to know what happens if training fails. What's your contingency plan when your son loses control and kills everyone within 50 miles? That won't happen. Your certainty is noted, but certainty isn't protection. Soren moved closer, his bulk casting shadows across the stone floor. The prophecy is clear, Alpha King. True alphas either unite or annihilate. Your grandfather chose annihilation. What makes you confident your son will choose differently? Because I'll teach him differently. My grandfather raised himself in isolation, drunk on power and unchallenged. Silas will be raised in community with oversight, with accountability. He'll learn that power serves rather than dominates. Pretty words, but power doesn't care about philosophy, it simply is. Soren stopped at the respectful distance, his eyes locked on Caden's. I fought beside your grandfather. Watched him transform from idealistic leader to genocidal tyrant. The change wasn't sudden, it was incremental. Small compromises, small cruelties, small justifications. Until one day he was burning villages and calling it necessary. I am not my grandfather. No, you're better. 2 centuries of good governance prove that. Soren's acknowledgement carried unexpected weight. But you're not the question. Your bloodline is. True alphas don't choose to become monsters through moral failure. They're built that way from conception. The power itself corrupts because power of that magnitude can't exist without corruption. The philosophical debate was academic cover for practical threat. Soren wasn't here to discuss nature versus nurture. He was here to establish grounds for future intervention. If you believe true alphas are inherently corrupt, then killing them in infancy is logical. Caden voiced the conclusion Soren wouldn't state directly. Why haven't you tried? Because I respect pack law and the High Council's authority. They're conducting oversight. I'm waiting for their assessment. Soren's expression hardened. But if that assessment confirms your son is dangerous, I won't stand idle while you protect him at everyone else's expense. Nobility has limits, survival doesn't. Then we understand each other. Caden matched his stare without flinching. You're waiting for justification. I'm working to ensure you never get it. I hope you succeed, Alpha King. I genuinely do. Soren's voice carried unexpected sincerity. But hope isn't strategy, and 4 weeks isn't much time to reprogram 200,000 years of evolutionary instinct. He withdrew with his honor guard, leaving Caden standing in the Great Hall with the taste of inevitability. War was coming. Maybe not today, maybe not at the Blood, but it was gathering like storms over distant peaks, waiting for the first excuse to break. Beta Garrett approached once the hall cleared, his expression grim. 6 more alphas sent word. They're arriving within the week. Smaller parties than Soren's, but still armed. We'll have 200 visiting wolves before the blood moon. 200 witnesses waiting for Silas to fail. Caden moved to the strategic map on the eastern wall, studying terrain and approaches. How many of our warriors are combat ready? 300 total. 50 are guards, essential positions can't be moved. Another 100 are support, logistics, supplies, medical. That leaves 150 actual fighters. Garrett's tactical assessment was brutally honest. Against 200 visiting alphas, plus whatever reinforcements they call, when things go bad, we're outnumbered and outpositioned. Defensive advantage. We hold the palace and know the terrain, but if they coordinate, surround us, cut supply lines, wait us out, we last maybe 3 weeks before starvation forces surrender. The mathematics of siege warfare were unchanged since ancient times. Defenders had advantage until resources ran dry. Then defenders became prisoners, waiting for execution. We can't win a direct confrontation. Caden traced the mountain passes, calculating escape routes and fallback positions. So we don't fight one, we make intervention more costly than patience. Show them that attacking Silverpine means casualties they can't afford. That only works if they're irrational actors. Garrett moved beside him, his scarred hands indicating various approaches. Soren is rational. Some of the others, they're zealots. They'll accept casualties if it means eliminating what they perceive as existential threat. Then we prepare for zealots. Caden's mind shifted fully into military mode, the part of him that had won campaigns through tactical superiority. Fortify the approaches. Mine the canyon passes not enough to kill, just enough to slow and harass. Establish fallback positions in the caves. Cache supplies in 3 locations. If they attack, we make them bleed for every foot. And Silas? Silas stays in the royal wing with Ariana and Elder Isla. If evacuation becomes necessary, there's a tunnel that leads to the North Caves. It was built during my grandfather's reign as escape route. He never needed it. We might. Garrett nodded, absorbing orders and converting them to actionable plans. This was what made him invaluable, the ability to hear worst-case scenarios and immediately begin preparing rather than arguing about probability. There's something else. Garrett's voice dropped to private conference level. Maya is pregnant again. 3 months. She did not want to announce until we were sure, but given current circumstances, the news should have been cause for celebration. New life growing pack, all the things that made leadership meaningful. Instead, Caden felt the weight of it, another vulnerable life depending on his decisions, another family gambling their future on his ability to navigate impossible situations. Congratulations! Caden gripped his friend's shoulder, the gesture carrying decades of shared experience. Does Finn know he's getting a sibling? He's 5 weeks old. He knows milk and warmth and sleep. Garrett's attempt at levity fell flat. But in 6 months, he'll have a brother or sister, assuming we survive that long. The assumption hung heavy. Garrett wasn't being dramatic, he was being realistic. 200 visiting Alpha's High Council observers documenting every perceived failure and a blood moon deadline 4 weeks away. Survival was assumption, not guarantee. We will survive. Caden injected certainty he didn't feel into his voice, because the alternative is unacceptable. You're my beta, my brother in everything but blood. Your family is my family. I won't let them burn because other packs are too afraid to give my son a chance, even if it costs Silverpine everything, especially then. Caden met his friend's eyes without hesitation. A kingdom built on murdering infants isn't worth keeping. We find another way, or we fail trying, but we don't compromise on this. Garrett absorbed the declaration, his expression cycling through concern and acceptance. Finally, he nodded. Then we prepare for everything and hope we're wrong about most of it. They spent the next 3 hours reviewing defensive positions, supply manifests, and evacuation protocols. Military planning in its most brutal form, calculating how many would die in each scenario, which positions were sacrificial, where to establish final stands. Caden had done this planning before during the Unification War and the subsequent rebellions. But this felt different. Then he'd been defending abstract concepts, territory sovereignty, political legitimacy. Now he was defending his son. The stakes had transmuted from ideological to visceral. Noon brought another visitor. Alpha Thorn returned from his earlier parley with urgent news. The formal greeting was dispensed with in favor of immediate tactical discussion. They met in the war room, just Thorn and Caden and Garrett, 3 warriors who understood the mathematics of violence. Alphaking, I bring warning from my territory. Thorn unrolled a map indicating positions southeast of Silverpine. 3 rogue packs have been moving through my land, heading northwest, toward you. They're not organized, no central leadership, but they're armed and motivated. Motivated by what? The usual: religious zealotry, paranoia, opportunism. Thorn's finger traced the rogue movements. They've been spreading prophecy interpretations that make your son sound like an apocalypse waiting to happen. The true alpha who will bring the long night. The child who must be killed to save Wolfkin. How many? Maybe 60 total across 3 packs. Not enough to threaten you directly, but enough to cause problems if they coordinate with visiting alphas. Or if they attempt assassination. Garrett voiced what they were all thinking. 60 zealots willing to die for their cause could breach palace security through sheer commitment. Caden studied the map, adding rogue positions to his mental calculations. The defensive situation was deteriorating. 200 visiting alphas who might turn hostile. 60 religious extremists actively planning intervention. High Council observers waiting for justification. And his son, 11 weeks old, completely unaware that his existence had destabilized half the Rockies. Why are you telling me this? Caden looked at Thorn directly. You made your position clear at our last meeting. You're waiting for justification to move against Silas. These rogues would provide convenient cover, let them attempt assassination, then claim you were too late to prevent it. I could. Thorn's expression was unreadable. And 3 days ago I might have. But I've been thinking about what you said. Judge by actions, not bloodline. I'm giving your son that chance. Seems only fair to ensure he survives long enough to earn the judgment. This could be trap. Garrett's military paranoia was showing. Feed us intelligence about rogues, position our defenses to counter them, then attack from different direction. It could be, Thorn acknowledged without defensiveness, but it's not. My father died fighting your grandfather, Alphaking. I have every reason to want your bloodline extinct, but I'm also old enough to remember when we executed children for their parents' crimes. That's the brutality your grandfather practiced. If I replicate it, I become the monster I claim to oppose. The logic was sound, the sincerity felt genuine, but Caden had lived too long to trust easily. Still refusing intelligence from potential ally because of trust issues was how kingdoms fell. What do you want in return? Same thing I wanted before. Transparency. Let me station observers with your son, not council bureaucrats looking for evidence, actual warriors who can assess genuine threat. If your son is learning control, I want to see it firsthand. If he's not, I want to know early enough to evacuate my territory before the power explosion kills everyone. You want access to my son. I want verification that training is working. Thorn held his ground. Your enemies want your son dead. I want him contained. Those are different objectives. One requires murder, one requires cooperation. Caden weighed the options. Refusing meant alienating potential ally and losing intelligence about rogue movements. Accepting meant allowing someone who'd threatened his son into proximity with him. Neither option was good. Both carried risk. 2 observers, rotated daily. They attend training sessions but don't interact directly with Silas. They report to you, but copies of reports come to me. First sign of hostility or attempted harm, they're expelled and we're enemies. Caden outlined terms that protected his son while acknowledging Thorn's legitimate concerns. Acceptable. Acceptable. Thorn extended his hand, the gesture carrying weight beyond simple agreement. My observers will arrive tomorrow. And Alphaking, I hope your son proves me wrong. I'd rather live in a world where true alphas can be trusted than one where we murder children preventatively. After Thorn departed, Garrett voiced the concern they both felt. That was either genuine alliance or sophisticated deception. Won't know which until it's too late. Story of kingship. Caden rolled up the map, his mind already working through how to integrate Thorn's intelligence into defensive planning. We make decisions with incomplete information and hope we're not wrong enough to get everyone killed. The afternoon brought a development that transformed political crisis into immediate catastrophe. A runner burst into the war room where Caden was reviewing supply manifests, the young wolf's face pale with the kind of terror that came from witnessing something beyond comprehension. My king, the training session. Something's happened. Caden was moving before the sentence finished, his body responding to alarm with the automatic reflexes of a warrior who'd survived 2 centuries by never hesitating. Garrett followed a step behind both of them, racing through corridors toward the royal wing. The runner's terror infected every wolf they passed, heads turning to track their passage, conversations dying into worried silence. The nursery door stood open. Inside, elderly still knelt on the floor with Silas in her arms, her face stricken. Ariana stood frozen near the window, her hand pressed to her mouth. The 6 High Council observers clustered together, their expressions cycling between horror and vindication. And in the center of the room, visible through the open door connecting to the solar, lay the body of a servant young wolf named Thomas, barely past his first decade. Dead. Throat torn out with the precision of predator kill. What happened? Caden's voice came out flat, military commander processing. Battlefield casualty. Elder Isla looked up, her eyes haunted. Silas was crying, overstimulated from the observer's presence. Thomas entered to light the fire standard serve as he'd done it hundreds of times, but Silas saw him as threat. Thomas moved too quickly, made sudden gesture, reaching for kindling. Silas's eyes went silver, and she didn't finish. Didn't need to. The evidence was scattered across the floor in spreading pools of crimson. Your son used Alpha Command to force Thomas to attack himself. Elder Cassius's voice carried the particular satisfaction of prophecy fulfilled. Compelled him to shift, then drove him into killing frenzy directed inward. Thomas tore out of his own throat while we watched. 11 weeks old and your son is already killing. The room spun. Caden forced himself to look at the body to truly see what his son had done. Thomas had been a good kid, loyal, hardworking, from a family that had served Silverpine for 3 generations. Now dead because an infant perceived threat and responded with overwhelming force. It was accident. Ariana's voice shook. Silas didn't mean he's a baby. He doesn't understand what he did. Intent is irrelevant when the result is murder. Cassius was already writing in his journal documenting evidence. This confirms the prophecy's warning. True alphas annihilate. Your son just demonstrated that capacity at 11 weeks. How many will he kill at 11 months, 11 years? He was frightened. Elder Isla's voice was desperate. Infants defend themselves when scared. This was defensive instinct amplified by power he doesn't know how to control. Which is exactly why he's too dangerous to live. Cassius closed his journal with deliberate finality. I'm filing formal recommendation with the High Council. Your son represents clear and immediate danger. Binding is no longer sufficient. Execution is the only logical response. The word hung in the air like verdict. Caden felt something break inside him. The careful control he maintained for weeks, shattering under weight of irreversible tragedy. His son had killed someone. Accidentally, defensively, without malice or understanding. But dead was dead, and Thomas would never see his 12th year. Get out. Caden's voice was quiet, but every wolf in the room felt the command's weight. All of you, out, now. The observers hesitated, sensing vulnerability, smelling opportunity. But Garrett had already moved into position, his body language making clear that removing themselves was not optional. They filed out Cassius, lingering longest to mark his territory with a final pronouncement. The council will convene emergency session. Expect judgment within 3 days. I suggest you prepare your son for binding or worse. Then he was gone, and Caden was alone with his family and a corpse that used to be a child. Take Silas. Caden's voice was hollow. Keep him in the royal wing. No visitors, no sessions, no one but family until I figure out what to do. Ariana gathered their son, who had started crying again, confused, frightened by the emotions flooding the room. She carried him toward the nursery, pausing only long enough to meet Caden's eyes through the mate bond. No words, just shared devastation and determination. They would protect their son, even from himself. After they left, Caden knelt beside Thomas's body. The young wolf's eyes were still open, frozen in whatever horror had consumed his final moments. Caden closed them gently, remembering when Thomas had first entered service at 8 years old. Eager, respectful, proud to work in the palace. Now dead because he'd moved too quickly in an infant's presence. I'm sorry, Pion. Caden's voice cracked on the words. This shouldn't have happened. You deserve better than dying for someone else's power. Garrett entered quietly, carrying linens to cover the body. Together they wrapped Thomas with the respect due fallen pack members, neither speaking, both trapped in the silence of guilt and grief. This was on Caden, his son, his responsibility, his failure to protect both his child and his pack. Thomas's family will want justice, Garrett stated the obvious. They deserve it. Caden stood his knees, protesting the movement. Gather them, I'll explain personally. Offer compensation, whatever they want. Land position, blood price, something. What they'll want is your son's life. I know. The acknowledgement tasted like poison, and I can't give them that. So we offer everything else and hope it's enough. It wouldn't be. Caden knew that with absolute certainty. Thomas's family would demand blood for blood, justice for justice. And they'd be right. Under pack law, killing demanded response. Even accidental killing. Even killing by infant who couldn't understand his actions. The funeral happened at sunset as tradition demanded. Thomas's body was placed on a pyre outside palace walls, his family standing in circle to witness the final journey. Caden attended despite Garrett's advice to send representative. This was his responsibility. His presence was required even if unwelcome. Thomas's father, William Blacksmith, who'd served 3 generations of Silver Pine Kings, stood beside the pyre with a face carved from stone. His mate Sarah held their surviving son, a boy of 9, who watched the flames with eyes too young to process death. Caden approached carefully, aware that his presence might trigger violence. William, Sarah, there are no words sufficient. Thomas was good wolf, loyal, kindoain. He died because my son didn't understand his own power. That's my failure as father and king. I'm sorry. William stared at the burning pyre, not looking at Caden. Your son killed my son. Yes. Accident or not, pack law demands justice. I know. I'm here to offer whatever compensation. I want your son. William's voice was flat, emotionless. Life for life, blood for blood. That's pack law. I can't give you that. Then there's nothing to discuss. William finally looked at him, and Caden saw hatred burning behind the grief. You stand here offering gold and land like they replace my boy. They don't. Nothing does. Your son took my son. Justice demands equal exchange. My son is 11 weeks old. He didn't understand. Neither did mine. William's control cracked fury, bleeding through. Thomas was following orders, doing his job. Your monster killed him for lighting a fire, and you want me to accept compensation. Accept that some wolves matter more than others because of bloodline. The accusation cut because it was true. Caden was protecting Silas because he was his son, because he was true alpha, because losing him meant more than losing Thomas. The calculation was brutal but unavoidable. Not all lives held equal weight in the hierarchy of necessity. I won't let you kill my son. Caden met William's hatred without flinching. But I will give you anything else. Name it and it's yours. Land title, blood price sufficient to honor Thomas's memory. You can't buy my forgiveness. I'm not trying to. I'm trying to acknowledge that your son mattered, that his death wasn't meaningless, that even though I can't give you the justice you deserve, I recognize the debt. William turned back to the pyre, watching his son burn. Leave. Your presence dishonors his memory. Caden withdrew, knowing he had made things worse, but having no better option. Behind him, Thomas's family stood in circle of grief while flames consumed their son. 17 wolves had gathered to witness the funeral, small number that spoke to how few truly mourned or how many blamed Silas for the death. As Caden walked back to palace, he felt eyes following from shadows, calculating, judging, waiting for the moment when protecting his son became liability too expensive to maintain. The emergency council session, convened 2 days after Thomas's death, conducted via magical projection that allowed distant alphas to participate without traveling. Caden stood in the war room, surrounded by shimmering images of 13 wolves whose collective authority could order his son's execution with legal impunity. Elder Cassius presided, his satisfaction barely concealed beneath procedural formality. The evidence was presented with clinical precision: Thomas's death, the witnesses' accounts, Silas's demonstrated lack of control. Medical reports confirmed cause of death, self-inflicted trauma induced by Alpha Command. No physical contact between infant and victim, just power raw and uncontrolled, compelling a young wolf to destroy himself. The defense may speak. Cassius's tone suggested he considered defense a formality rather than legitimate counter-argument. Caden had prepared remarks, consulted with Elder Isla on legal precedents, reviewed every historical case of accidental killing by juveniles. All of it felt inadequate against the image of Thomas's body. My son is 11 weeks old. Pack law protects juveniles from capital punishment until their first year, specifically because infants can't form intent. Silas didn't choose to kill Thomas. He reacted defensively to perceived threat with power he doesn't understand. Punishing him for that is punishing him for existing. Intent is irrelevant when the power itself is the crime. Alpha Soren's projection spoke from the northern position. Your son's capacity to kill accidentally at 11 weeks means he'll kill deliberately at 11 months. The trajectory is clear. Unless training works, Caden gestured toward Elder Isla, who stood beside him. Elder Isla has documented progress. Silas is learning to recognize his own power to hold it internally rather than releasing it reflexively. One tragedy doesn't negate weeks of advancement. One tragedy proves the advancement is insufficient. Cassius shuffled papers with deliberate rustling. The council's mandate is preventing another war. Your grandfather killed 4,000 wolves over 20 years. Your son killed one in 11 weeks. Simple mathematics suggests eliminating the threat now saves thousands later. The logic was brutal utilitarian and politically convenient. Caden saw the vote calculus playing out. Most council members had already decided. This session was theater providing legal cover for predetermined conclusion. Then bind his wolf. Caden forced the words past his throat's resistance. The prophecy offers two paths. If you won't let him live free, imprison his power. Cripple him rather than kill him. Silence followed the concession. Several council members exchanged glances, surprised that Caden had volunteered the binding option or satisfaction that he'd broken first. Binding at 11 weeks carries significant risk. Elder Isla's voice was careful. The ritual is designed for older wolves whose consciousness can withstand magical suppression. Applied to an infant, it could cause permanent psychological damage beyond simple power loss. Define damage. Alpha Vera's projection leaned forward, her ancient features calculating. Potential outcomes include developmental delays, emotional dysregulation, inability to form pack bonds, depression, rage disorders. Isla listed clinical terms for destroying a child's future. He'd live, but quality of that life is uncertain. Better uncertain life than certain death, Cassius made note in his journal. And certainly better than allowing him to mature into his great-grandfather. The council votes on two options: execution under threat prevention protocols or binding under the prophecy's mandate. Show of position. 13 projections. 13 ancient wolves whose combined experience exceeded 3,000 years. 13 judges deciding whether Caden's son lived or died, walked or crawled through half existence. 7 raised their ethereal hands for execution. 4 for binding. 2 abstained. The council recommends execution, citing clear and immediate danger under mutual security provisions. Cassius's voice carried triumph poorly disguised as regret. However, the prophecy's existence provides legal basis for binding as alternative. Alphaking Caden, you have until the blood moon's 16 days to prepare for binding ritual. Failure to comply will result in enforcement action, including military intervention. The projections dissolved, leaving Caden standing in the war room with the taste of defeat. 16 days. His son would be bound, his wolf in prison, his future crippled. But he'd be alive. That had to be enough. Garrett entered as the last projection faded, his expression grim. William filed formal blood challenge. He's invoking ancient right trial by combat between wrong party and responsible party. You versus him. Tomorrow at dawn. He can't win. Caden's voice was hollow. I've trained for 2 centuries. He's a blacksmith. He doesn't need to win. He needs to die trying. Then his family can claim they sought justice, that the system failed them, that protecting true alphas means sacrificing common wolves. Garrett's tactical mind was visible in his assessment. It's political theater. He makes you kill him, turns himself into martyr, galvanizes opposition. I won't kill him. Then he'll kill you. Those are the only outcomes trial by combat allows. Caden moved to the window, watching night settle over Silverpine territory. Somewhere out there, William was preparing for combat he couldn't win against, opponent he couldn't defeat. Seeking death with honor because life without his son held no meaning. There has to be third option. Caden spoke to the darkness as much as Garrett. Something between murder and suicide. Not under pact law. Blood challenge demands blood resolution. Garrett moved beside him, 2 old warriors contemplating impossible choices. But you could refuse the challenge. Lose face, lose authority, but stay alive. Let the council's judgment stand as sufficient justice. And tell every wolf in Silverpine that their king won't face legitimate grievance. That protecting my son matters more than honoring their dead. Caden shook his head. That's how rebellions start. How kingdoms fall. Kingdoms fall lots of ways. Fighting challenges you can't lose without looking monstrous is one of them. The truth settled like stone in Caden's chest. Tomorrow at dawn, he'd face Thomas's father in combat that could only end in tragedy. Win, and he was the tyrant who killed a grieving father for seeking justice. Lose, and he was the fool who died for nothing, leaving his son unprotected. Both outcomes destroyed something essential. I'll fight. Caden's voice carried the weight of decision. But I'll fight to disable, not kill. Make him submit without death. That's the third option, victory with mercy. Mercy requires cooperation from both parties. If William refuses to submit, keeps fighting until you're forced to kill him, mercy becomes murder wearing different name. Then I hope he loves his surviving son more than he hates me. Caden turned from the window, because tomorrow we find out if grief is stronger than survival. Dawn arrived cold and clear, the kind of mountain morning that made every breath visible. The combat circle had been established in the central courtyard, packed earth surrounded by stone walls that amplified sound. 300 silver pine wolves gathered to witness their faces reflecting mixture of anticipation and dread. The visiting alphas watched from elevated positions, 200 foreign wolves assessing Caden's response to legitimate challenge. William entered from the east wearing simple combat leathers and carrying his father's blade, traditional weapon passed through generations. His face showed the exhaustion of sleepless nights, but his eyes held terrible focus. He'd made peace with dying. That made him more dangerous than any trained warrior. Caden entered from the west armed with weapons he'd carried through 50 campaigns. But against a wolf seeking death's superior equipment meant nothing. Only will mattered, and William's will was forged from grief strong enough to override survival instinct. Elder Marcus stood as arbiter, his voice carrying across the courtyard. Blood challenge has been invoked under ancient rite. Thomas's death demands justice. William of Silverpine Pack claims wrongful death by Alphaking's heir. Alphaking Caden accepts responsibility as sire and ruler. Combat continues until submission, death, or arbiter intervention. Begin. William attacked immediately, abandoning defense for aggressive strikes that forced Caden backward. The blacksmith had none of Caden's training, but he had rage and momentum. His blade traced patterns that demanded response, pushing Caden into defensive positions that made him look weak. Caden could have ended it in 3 moves: disarm, disable, submit. 2 centuries of combat experience against 17 years of grief. But ending it quickly made William's death look casual, made the challenge look trivial. So Caden defended, letting William burn through his rage, waiting for exhaustion to create opening for mercy. Fight me! William's shout echoed off stone. Stop defending and fight! Give me the death I came for! I won't kill you! Caden blocked another strike, his blade turning Williams aside without counter. Your son deserves more than his father dying uselessly. My son deserves justice. Your son deserves his father alive and raising him. Thomas is gone. Don't leave your surviving boy an orphan. The words penetrated where defense hadn't. William's next strike came slower down, creeping into certainty. But doubt made him sloppier, desperation replacing discipline. His blade overextended, leaving him exposed. Caden could have driven his sword through William's chest. Instead, he stepped inside the blacksmith's guard and struck with pommel against temple, precise blow, calibrated to stun without killing. William collapsed unconscious before he hit the ground. The courtyard erupted in murmurs, surprise, approval, disappointment. Caden knelt beside William's, checking pulse and breathing. Alive, defeated but breathing. Combat concluded. Elder Marcus's voice cut through the noise. Blood challenge satisfied through Alphaking's victory. Justice served under pack law. But Caden knew better. Justice hadn't been served. Thomas was still dead. William's grief remained unresolved. All Caden had done was prevent one more death while demonstrating that power protected power. The precedent was terrible, even if the outcome was merciful. He stood addressing the assembled pack. William sought justice for his son. He deserved that opportunity, even though the law ultimately protected mine. I accept responsibility for Thomas's death as Alphaking and father. His family will receive land title and compensation sufficient to honor his memory. William retains all rank and position, no reprisal for legitimate challenge. When the pronouncement was calculated to show strength through mercy, traditional response designed to convert enemy into ally. But Caden saw William's surviving son watching from the crowd, his 9-year-old face twisted with anger. That boy would grow up hating Silas, blaming him for his brother's death and his father's humiliation. More seeds for future conflict. After the challenge concluded, after William had been carried to medical care and the crowd dispersed, Caden stood alone in the combat circle. Blood stained the packed earth. William's blood from the head wound. Not lethal but visible. Evidence that even mercy carried cost. That was well handled. Thorne's voice came from behind the visiting Alpha, having remained after others left. You could have killed him, should have by some interpretations. But you chose restraint. Restraint or weakness, depending on perspective. Caden turned to face him. Half the witnesses think I'm soft. The other half think I'm cruel for defeating grieving father. Leadership means being hated by everyone for different reasons. Thorne moved into the circle, studying the bloodstains. My observers report your son is making progress. Genuine progress. Yesterday, he held power internally for 3 hours without releasing. That's remarkable for 12 weeks. The council doesn't care about progress. They care about preventing another war. Caden's voice was bitter. Thomas's death gave them justification for binding. 16 days until blood moon. 16 days until I cripple my son to satisfy wolves who've already decided he's guilty. Or 16 days to prove them wrong. Thorne met his eyes steadily. You ask me to judge your son by actions not bloodline. I'm extending that courtesy, but the clock is running. If training truly works, demonstrate it before the blood moon. Give the council reason to reconsider. How Silas can't undo Thomas's death. Can't prove negative that he won't kill again. They want certainty that doesn't exist. Then create different certainty. Show them bound. True Alpha is more dangerous than trained one. Thorne gestured toward the palace. Binding suppresses power but doesn't eliminate it, just imprisons it behind magical locks. What happens when those locks fail? When suppressed power explodes after years of containment, you'd have an adult true Alpha with zero training suddenly unleashed. The argument was clever, possibly true, and definitely self-serving. Thorne wanted Caden to fight the binding because Thorne didn't want unpredictable variables in his future. But self-serving didn't mean wrong. I'll need allies. Caden forced himself to voice the request. If I refuse the binding, the council will send armies. Silverpine can't stand alone against coordinated intervention. You're asking me to choose sides in coming war. I'm asking you to consider which side serves your interests. Bureaucratic council imposing mandatory binding on any wolf they deem too powerful, or individual packs maintaining sovereignty over their own children. Caden framed it as political calculation rather than emotional plea. Today it's my son. Tomorrow it's any Alpha they decide threatens their authority. Thorne studied him for a long moment, weighing commitment against risk. If I support you, I'm declaring against the council. That makes me enemy to half the territories. If you don't support me, you're accepting that the council can dictate internal pack matters. That makes you subordinate, not sovereign. Politics. Thorne's mouth twisted. Everything becomes politics. I came here to assess threat. Now you're converting me into ally or enemy based on abstract principle. Not abstract, your observers report progress. You've seen evidence that training works. Supporting that evidence means supporting sovereignty. Unless you believe the council should control all packs, I believe in practical power, not theoretical rights. Thorne moved toward the courtyard exit, his decision visible in rigid shoulders. But I also remember when councils executed children for convenience. My father died fighting that tyranny. I won't replicate it. You'll have my support. 20 warriors in my political backing. Use them wisely. After Thorne departed, Caden remained in the bloodstained circle calculating. 20 warriors from Thorne plus 300 from Silverpine against potential council army. The mathematics weren't favorable, but war was rarely won through mathematics alone. Sometimes belief mattered more than numbers. The next 12 days passed in escalating tension. More Alphas arrived daily, establishing camps outside palace walls until Silverpine territory resembled armed conference. Some came to witness the binding, some to ensure it happened, some to decide which side to support if conflict erupted. The political landscape fractured along unexpected lines. Younger Alphas tended towards sovereignty arguments, while older ones favored council authority. Caden spent his days in diplomatic meetings, his nights planning defense, and his rare free hours watching Elder Otto work with Silas. The training had evolved beyond simple meditation. Isla had developed a technique where she flooded Silas with her own power, creating pressure that forced him to contain rather than release. The infant responded with surprising aptitude, his silver eyes glowing briefly before dimming as he learned to hold the energy internally. He's ready. Isla made the announcement 8 days before Blood Moon, her voice carrying cautious optimism. Not perfectly, he's still 12 weeks old, but he can control the power enough to prevent accidental discharge. With continued training, he might achieve full control by his first year. Might isn't certainty. Caden watched his son sleep, tiny chest rising and falling, with perfect innocence. The council demands guarantees. Then they're demanding impossibility. Power of this magnitude doesn't come with guarantees, just probability and hope. Isla packed her materials. But I can testify that binding would destroy most of his developmental progress. The magical suppression would undo weeks of neural pathways we built. He'd have to relearn everything if the binding ever failed. And you believe it will fail, eventually. Her certainty was absolute. Magical bindings are temporary by nature. They require maintenance renewal, constant reinforcement. Applied to a true alpha's power, the binding would degrade within years, maybe decades if we're lucky, but it would fail. And when it did, all that suppressed power would explode without warning or control. The scenario Thorne had suggested was confirmed by Silverpine's greatest magical expert. Binding wasn't solution, it was delayed catastrophe. 3 days before Blood Moon, the situation crystallized into crisis. Elder Cassius arrived with 50 council enforcers armed and authorized to ensure binding compliance. They established position at palace entrance, making clear that Caden's authority was conditional on cooperation. The confrontation happened in the Great Hall with Cassius standing at one end and Caden at the other, 300 Silverpine wolves between them and 50 council enforcers backing Cassius's position. The Blood Moon rises in 3 days. Cassius's voice carried bureaucratic finality. Preparations for binding must begin immediately. The ritual requires specific materials, sacred space, and 12 hours of preliminary rites. Your compliance is mandatory. And if I refuse, Caden kept his voice level, then you're in violation of council mandate. We enforce compliance through whatever means necessary. You mean you'd attack Silverpine for refusing to cripple an infant who's demonstrated control improvement? We'd enforce lawful authority against Rogue Alpha, who places his bloodline above pack security. Cassius's correction was subtle but significant. You're not being persecuted, Alpha King. You're being held accountable. The framing was clever. Caden wasn't defending his son, he was defying legitimate authority. Resistance became rebellion rather than parental protection. I want 24 hours. Caden forced negotiation into ultimatum. 1 day to consult with my elders, finalize arrangements, prepare my son. You get compliance after that. Why would I grant delay? Because forcing compliance through immediate violence makes you invader, not authority. Granting reasonable time makes you legitimate power respecting due process. Caden gestured toward the assembled pack. Which narrative do you prefer other territories hearing? Cassius weighed the political calculation. 24 hours, then compliance or enforcement. Choose wisely, Alpha King. After the council enforcers withdrew, Garrett approached with the expression of soldier delivering bad tactical news. We can't win. 50 enforcers plus 200 visiting alphas will support council authority against our 300 minus non-combatants. We're outnumbered and outpositioned. I know. Caden moved to the strategic map, though he'd memorized every detail weeks ago, which is why we don't fight them all. We fight the ones who matter and make the rest reconsider. Assassination. Garrett's voice dropped to private conference level. Targeted strike against council leadership. Cassius and his inner circle. Remove them and the authority becomes questionable. Enforcers without clear command don't know whether to attack or negotiate. That's declaring war on the council. They declared war when they mandated binding. Caden traced routes through the palace. We have home advantage knowledge of terrain and 24 hours to prepare. If we're strategic, we can remove Cassius before his enforcers realize what happened. Then we negotiate from position of accomplished fact rather than requested permission. And if other territories retaliate, we deal with that after saving my son. Caden met his beta's eyes without flinching. I'm not binding Silas. Not for the council, not for peace, not for anything. If that means war, then war it is. Garrett absorbed the declaration, his expression cycling through concern and acceptance. Finally, he nodded. Then we prepare for war and hope we're good enough to survive. The next 18 hours were spent in frantic preparation, disguised as compliance. Publicly, Caden's staff gathered materials for binding rituals, sacred herbs, ceremonial implements, the appearance of cooperation. Privately, Captain Riker positioned his best warriors in strategic locations, established fallback routes, and prepared for targeted strike against council leadership. The plan was simple and concept complex in execution. During the preliminary rites, when Cassius would be focused on ritual preparation, Caden's warriors would strike simultaneously, killing Cassius and his 3 senior advisors before enforcers could respond. The remaining enforcers, lacking clear leadership and uncertain of authority, would hopefully negotiate rather than retaliate. Simple, brutal, likely to fail spectacularly. But failure meant binding, and Caden had decided some failures were worse than death. 6 hours before the strike, Thorn arrived at Caden's private chambers. I know what you're planning. Assassination during ritual preparation. Risky, but possibly effective. And you're here to stop me? Caden didn't bother denying the obvious. I'm here to offer alternative. Thorn unrolled maps showing territory beyond Silverpine borders. If you kill Cassius, the council responds with full military intervention. Even with my support, you can't hold Silverpine against coordinated assault. But if you run, evacuate your son and family to neutral territory, you buy time. Run where every pack answers to council authority, except the disputed territories. Thorn indicated the unmapped regions between established packs. No sovereignty, no council jurisdiction. Dangerous, primitive, lawless, but also free. You survive there long enough, maybe council loses interest. Maybe new council forms with different priorities. You're suggesting I abandon my kingdom to live as rogue. I'm suggesting you choose your son's life over your throne. Thorn's voice was hard. Kingship is temporary. Fatherhood is permanent. What matters more? The question struck deeper than intended. Caden had spent 2 centuries defining himself as Alphaking, building identity around governance and authority. But beneath the crown was simply father who loved his son. Which identity deserves sacrifice? If I run the council installs new Alpha at Silverpine, someone who will cooperate, accept their authority, subordinate pack sovereignty to bureaucratic oversight. Caden stared at the map, seeing a future he'd never imagined. Everything I built gets dismantled. Everything you built was meant to serve your pack. If abandoning it saves your son, isn't that the logical choice? Logic and duty don't always align. Caden moved to the window, watching evening settle over his territory. I'm Alphaking. My responsibility is 300 wolves who depend on my leadership. Abandoning them to save my son means prioritizing family over pack. That's what my grandfather did. That's what created the tyranny. Your grandfather prioritized power over everything. You're prioritizing love. Those aren't equivalent, aren't they? Caden turned back. Both involve choosing personal attachment over collective good. The motive might be better, but the outcome is the same king who serves himself rather than his people. Then give them choice. Thorn gestured toward the palace below. Call assembly, let your pack decide. Support assassination and potential war, or support evacuation and new leadership. Democracy instead of dictatorship. The suggestion was radical enough to work. Caden had spent 2 centuries building trust through transparency. Extending that trust to collective decision about their future was consistent with everything he claimed about it. And if they choose war, then we fight together and probably die gloriously. Thorn's dark humor matched the moment, but at least the choice was theirs.